If you've ever worn historical clothing, you've probably gotten asked the question, how do you pee in that? Along with explaining the history of underpants and how it all worked logistically, I am going to actually show it to you. But for demonstration purposes, I will be wearing these black leggings the entire time so that, that you can, every time you see a black legging, you can know that that's where skin is supposed to show, because obviously we want to keep this family friendly. And I'm going to be using, instead of an actual toilet, I'm going to be using a chair. For most of history, as far as restrooms go, you would have three options. You could have either an outhouse that could be physically outside of the house, a separate building which housed the toilet. Or it could be a part of like the castle wall, for instance, if you were rich and lived in a castle. Or it could be just a semi-detached area, like alcove out of the house, where then would be the outhouse, so that the smells would be mostly contained in that area, and that would be dropped then directly outside, so that then there would be like a latrine area where you would then collect the excess waste from. But this would give you the option that you don't actually have to physically go outside, but you could still have an outhouse. Or the other option is that you would have a separate room for a chair, which was basically, it functioned exactly like a chair, but it had a hole in the center and it had a other bottom underneath where you would put your chamber pot to. And then that third option would be just the chamber pot or bordaloo. Chamber pots and bordaloos could function in two different ways. Either they could be meant to be brought to you underneath your skirts, so that basically you would be in a semi-sitting or semi-standing position, or the other option was that you would have it already on the floor or on the privy seat, and then you would sit on top of it or squat on top of it. The chamber pot was usually a thing that everyone in every social class had, because it was used not only for, actual restroom purposes, but it was also used for potty training for small kids, and also as a nighttime chamber pot when you couldn't be bothered to go all the way to the outhouse. But since most of these clothes that I'm demonstrating are going to be more fashionable, more high fashion clothing, I am going to be demonstrating them with a chair, because that privy chair would have been basically the standard either as a chair form or in the outhouse form for most of the people who could afford the really fashionable clothing throughout history. So now let's get to it. What did women wear underneath their dresses for most of history? Well, the answer is nothing. Underpants are a fairly new invention. For most of history, women simply didn't wear any. Their basic undergarment was either a smock, a shift, or a chemise. The name of the garment changes throughout history, but the actual function of the garment is still the same. It is basically a garment made out of rectangles and triangles. It is very functional. It is made out of linen, but it is essentially a dress. This is your underlayer. This keeps you clean. This keeps your body from touching your outer clothes. This is also the layer of your clothing that gets washed the most. This garment's function is to take all those body oils and fluids and make sure that sweat and all the other gunk doesn't get to your outer clothing. So basically, this is the only underwear you ever really need. So when you are wearing just this, and on top of it, no matter how many layers of skirts you put on, you're still going to have only skirts. So all you need to do is hike up those skirts and you're ready to go. Later on, of course, you add a layer of corsetry underneath here, and then there's even more and more skirts, because you can create a lot more volume once you have that pressure point at the waist taken care of by the corset. But still, no underpants. Underpants don't really become a thing for women until the 19th century. In the early 19th century, in the Regency era, when skirts and layers are extremely thin and sheer, sometimes women opt for wearing a pair of pantalettes, as they were usually called in that era. So it is basically a very long pant garment, usually ankle length, that could be a layer of modesty. This was also true especially for sports and beachwear outfits, which could sometimes by the 1810s be fairly short. But in this era, it was not yet commonplace, and a lot of women opted not to use them, and they were not considered an underwear layer in the way we think of as an underwear layer, because definitely those pant legs could be visible from underneath the skirts. As we get from the Regency era to the Romantic era and then 1830s, and skirts become much more voluminous again, and they also become shorter again. That's really when underwear for women, as in underpants, becomes the standard. But the key feature when it comes to function is that these garments are always split at the crotch. So that basically means that you have two separate pant legs and no crotch seam that would be sewn together. So it is completely left open. These split drawers are worn on top of the chemise and corset. The chemise is tucked into them, and no, it's not really a problem that the chemise is longer and that there's a lot of fabric and a lot of bulk to tuck in. Because the pant legs are voluminous, the crotch seam is very low, so that there is plenty of room to tuck in that fabric and make sure that it is there gathered in a way that it doesn't like clump or pinch or like cause weird pressure points. You don't actually feel it really a lot when you're wearing it. But that chemise allows you to tuck it in between your legs so that you have basically fabric there, so that you have the illusion of a closed crotch even though the pants themselves are open. When the chemise is tucked in and that is the only thing that is actually touching your body, that is the garment that needs to be washed the most, and the actual drawers don't really get that dirty, but they can still be washed if they need to be. And then again throughout the 1830s, 40s, and 50s, when the layers of skirts just increase and increase, but the layers of skirts are all still soft. The way you would use the actual restroom is that you would just hike up all those layers of skirts. It's usually easiest to grab the lowest one. That is usually a corded petticoat or a quilted petticoat, so that petticoat usually has a lot more structure than the other ones. So if you grab that and then kind of flip it over and flip all the skirts in that, you don't have to worry about anything going into the toilet or you getting anything messy. Everything stays neat and clean, and then it is easy to use the restroom. And after you've used the restroom, you just tuck the chemise back into your drawers and you are good to go. The only real difference to this is when you're wearing structured hooped undergarments. Then it is much easier to have the toilet or the bordaloo come to you rather than try to work it underneath all those layers. You can, and it is manageable, but oftentimes I would either recommend doing it with a body or then historically you would most of the time just use a chamber pot because that is easy and quick. But for modern purposes, what I really recommend anytime you have any sort of big understructures, big trains, a bustle, anything like this that is going to impede your ability to really grab all those skirts in and tuck them up. I would highly recommend that then you use the bathroom and the toilet seat backwards. So then all you have to do is hike your skirts up from the front and widen out your stance. Make sure that your chemise is out of the way and you're good to go. You don't have to worry about any of the underlayers this way. You don't have to worry about what's going on behind your butt. And you don't have to worry about getting those skirts to lay nicely on top of the structures once you get them back down. Because that definitely is an issue. I remember my friend's mom telling me about how in the late 60s, when they still had the really poofy skirts that were fashionable in the 50s and 60s, and you would have that like light crinolette style of underskirt, you would sometimes get your skirt stuck into that and you wouldn't notice it, and then you'd go around with your panties showing from the back until somebody was kind enough to tell you that you might have a little problem. So to avoid that issue, I definitely recommend using the toilet the other way around. And this, by the way, is not limited just to historical things. I definitely recommend any sort of bridal gowns, anything with any sort of more voluminous structures underneath the skirts, that you use the toilet the wrong way around. It is so much easier. As the 19th century progresses, the drawers do change their shape a little bit. They do gradually become tighter and more close-fitting, but the crotch still stays roomy. There is still plenty of room for you both to sit and to move and for you to tuck that chemise in. The chemise also, as the drawers get tighter, they also get shorter, but they always stay long enough that the fabric will meet at the center so that you have the illusion of a closed crotch. The first real competitor to the open drawers comes around in the 1860s and is typically usually in that era only worn for sports and different sorts of like activity, winter activities and things like this. But it slowly gains popularity, but it doesn't become the standard until the early 20th century, really. And as you might have guessed, that garment is called the closed crotch drawers. Simple. These would function basically the same way as the open drawers, that you would not take them off to use the restroom. Instead, they would have a separate waistband that would attach in the back, and then that butt flap area would be its own separate piece that would attach to the sides with buttons. So to use the restroom, you would open those buttons to let that butt flap drop, and then you would tuck your chemise up, and then you would pick up any layers of skirts that were still there, and then use the restroom. Then through the layers, it is slightly trickier to get that butt flap back up and get that chemise to be stayed tucked in nicely. So this is slightly slower, and that's probably one of the reasons why it didn't become hugely popular until basically the 1910s. But during this era, there was another kind of undergarment that also gained popularity, and that was the union suit. This was originally part of the reform dress movement, but then became just a generalized fashion item that most women owned, at least in some way or form. They could be a full body garment that had long sleeves and long pants, basically a onesie for adults. They could have that butt flap option on them, but more typically they were just open crotched. These union suits were first knitted garments, and later on they were called combination garments if they were made out of woven fabrics. In the case of the union suit, it took the place of both the chemise and the drawers. So this would be your innermost garment. This would be the thing that was next to your skin. Combination underwear is slightly different. That is the woven version, because these woven versions could either be the inner layer, the one that is against your skin, so that it combines your chemise and your drawers. Or the other option is later on, when a corset cover starts to be worn, that it could be also a garment that is worn as a combination of a corset cover and drawers. As far as function goes, there is no real difference between whether you're wearing a chemise and drawers or the combination underwear or union suit. The only real difference is that in the union suits and combination underwear, typically the butt flaps are crossed over each other, so that it creates some of the coverage that is lacking from the lack of a chemise underneath. Though I do need to say that if you are wearing it as a combination of a corset cover and drawers, then of course you are actually wearing still a chemise underneath. And like I mentioned, the closed crotch drawers really gained their popularity in the 1910s. But that is due to a few innovations. Because in the 1910s, the most basic combination underwear becomes your envelope chemise. The envelope chemise is basically what it sounds like. It's a chemise with kind of like an envelope part that closes usually with buttons, sometimes later on with snaps. So it creates this kind of envelope shape that creates that underwear garment. But because of the long line corsets, these garments in the 1910s are very low crotched. So you are talking about that crotch area being close to your knees rather than actually anywhere near where your actual crotch area is. And that is very important for the function of the garment. Then later on in the later teens and getting into the 1920s, there comes a new variation of this. And that has, instead of that piece that continues on from the actual chemise, that into that crotch area that needs to be very low to function, is to create a separate piece, usually just a long rectangle, that then closes with buttons in the front or sometimes later on at the center. The center one is slightly harder to operate because you do need to reach quite far in between to get those flaps. But essentially, when you have these flapped kind of undergarments, the only real trick to them and using them to go to the restroom is that you need to remember to tuck them into your corset when you use the restroom, so that there isn't that butt flap that would flap back in. And this is also true because your corset is quite long, so it kind of prevents it coming up with the rest of the garments when you lift the skirts up. So it is just easier to tuck it into the corset and it will stay there. And then you just take it back from there and then close the buttons and you're ready to go. In the 1920s, there is also a new garment that comes onto the market, and that is the kind of panties that you would actually take off to use the restroom. But as this emerges, then of course there happens a shift at the same time for function. So instead of wearing the panties underneath, you would wear them on top of your corset to make the restroom visits a lot more easy. Because despite the popular belief, the corset didn't actually go anywhere. It wasn't used by all women in the 1920s onwards, but it was still very much frequently used. It just changed its name from a corset to a girdle, which became a lot more popular of a name, but the function is essentially the same. Historical women's undergarments were both designed and worn by women, so they were designed to be easy and make restroom visits as easy as possible and be as functional as possible. These garments did not make your life harder. Actually, modern day jeans and especially Spanx actually make your life a lot harder and the restroom visit a lot slower than most historical undergarments. Well, that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope to see you again next time. So hit that subscribe button if you haven't already and you'd like to do that. And please like this video if you enjoyed this. And me and Noodle will say bye, and I hope to see you again next time. Bye. Yeah, are you getting to be too big to be in my lap for these videos? But the internet people really like seeing you in these videos. Yeah. I mean, you are too big. Yeah. Okay, Noodle. Yeah. You get to go. Bye. Let's say bye to the internet. Bye to the internet. They could have that butt flap. They could have that butt flaption.